You can't escape it. Everybody's talking about identity these days, but what people aren't talking about is how finding our identity in the wrong places can lead to stuff like this. 25-year-old trans cheerleader kicked out of cheer camp for allegedly choking a 17-year-old girl teammate. So let's talk about why I believe that it's better for all of us to get our identity from God rather than from outside of God, and also why I believe that things would have went a lot differently had the trans cheerleader gotten his identity from God rather than from being a woman. All right, let's go. So there's a story going around about a 25-year-old trans cheerleader getting kicked out of camp for choking out a 17-year-old female teammate. According to this article, 25-year-old transgender cheerleader Avery Chanel Medlock was expelled from Ranger College cheerleading camp in Texas over the choking incident involving a 17-year-old female teammate identified only as Carly. According to media reports, Carly and other cheerleaders reportedly locked themselves inside of a room to hide from an angry Miss Medlock, with police called in to handle the situation, which eventually saw Medlock booted from camp. Medlock, however, took to Facebook to explain the incident, saying she stood up for herself. "Well, guys, I'm officially retired as a cheerleader as of last night at 5:30 a.m. A girl on the team was being very disrespectful and told me I'm a man with a penis and that guys should not be on the team," she wrote. So what led Medlock, a 25-year-old biological male, to choke out a teenage girl for referring to him as a man?
Nah, yo, hold my poodle. Hold my poodle. Hey, yo, what's up? Y'all got a problem? What? What, boy? What? I take the both of you.
Before we get into how Medlock's belief in God could have changed everything, let's be clear on what I believe drove all of this behavior. And that's identity.
Identity.
Your identity is who you are, and who you are informs your personal value. And it's because of this that when people invalidate or deny our identity, what we tend to hear at a deeper and more subconscious level is that we aren't valuable. And given if we're tired or we're in a bad mood or if things have built up enough, this can cause us to lash out in ways that we otherwise wouldn't.
Hold my poodle. What?
So when it comes to where we get our identity from, in our culture today, one message that we tend to hear is that our identity comes from how we identify sexually. And so we're made to believe that who we are is directly tied to our sexual identity. And think about this. If we believe that, then it makes sense why denying or invalidating somebody's sexual identity can be taken as an insult to their sense of personal value. So now with that in mind, let's think about how identity could have played a role in this trans cheerleader allegedly choking out a 17-year-old girl. If Medlock found identity in being a woman, given what we said about identity, it would go something like this. Medlock would be thinking something like, my identity is in being a woman, and because I am a woman, I am valuable. The girl on my team said that I was a man. But if I'm not a woman, I am not valuable. And therefore, on a deeper level, when she said that I wasn't a woman, what I heard her saying was that I was not valuable. And it was the feeling of having his personal value invalidated that led him to lash out and choke the girl on his team. Now, in just a second, we're going to get to how things would have been different for Medlock if he got his identity from God instead of being a woman. But real quick, I want you to see the parallels between Medlock and the rest of us, so that way we can see how this works in our lives as well. Lashing out over having your identity disrespected is something that all of us have experienced at some point in our lives. Whenever people deny or invalidate our identity, we take so much offense to it because they seem to be invalidating our sense of value, even though we aren't always consciously aware that that's what's going on. It might not be sexual identity for most of us. Instead, it could be our looks or our success or how good of a parent that we are, and so on. It can really be anything that we say, this is who I am, and because this is who I am valuable. And likewise, depending on our mood or how much tension is built up, it can cause us to lash out on people in ways that we otherwise just wouldn't have. The problem is that whenever we place our identity in anything that requires other people's affirmation or even our own affirmation, then we're in trouble. The reason why is because we simply can't control other people, and they're always changing, and also we're always changing. And as long as this is the case, then we'll always be vulnerable to having our sense of value threatened by the changing moods, perspectives, and behaviors of others, as well as our own changing moods, perspectives, and behaviors. It's the potential change that leads us to having a fragile identity that could be easily threatened or offended by the words of others, as well as the things that we tell ourselves. In both cases, someone criticizing us can lead us to lash out. So therefore, a better solution would be for us to find our identity in someone that won't ever change and is stable. For those of us that are Christians, we can know that our identity is not in who we think that we are or who other people think that we are. Instead, our identity is found in God and who He thinks that we are. It's because God never changes that our identity is stable and secure. So therefore, it doesn't matter what anyone else says and if they affirm our identity or not. We can know who we are, and we can also know that we're valuable no matter what anyone else says. So there's no need for us to lash out when people deny our identities, directly or indirectly. But of course, this doesn't mean that Christians don't get triggered and they don't lash out at times. But what this does mean is that when we do, this should give us an opportunity to examine ourselves and to search our hearts in order to see where we're getting our identity from at that specific moment. What we'll find is that when we unintentionally lash out, what we're usually forgetting is that our identity comes from God and who He says who we are, and not whoever our hearts are telling us that we are in that moment. And it's in those times that we need to take a step back, remind ourselves of who we are, and remind ourselves that we're valuable because of Him and who He thinks we are. If we do that, then we'll be a lot less prone to internalizing criticism, and will ultimately be far more consistent and stable because He's consistent and stable. So finally, to bring it back to Medlock, if Medlock understood that his identity didn't have to come from being a woman, and instead his identity could come from who God says that he is, then he wouldn't have had to lash out on the girl, and overall, I believe that he would have been much happier all around. But maybe that's just me. Let me know what you think down below. And the next time that you forget that your identity comes from God, and as a result, you lash out on other people, what are you gonna say? What do you mean?